I think the 2005 Lotus Elise is basically the poor man's McLaren F1. I realize that's an incredibly bold statement to make about a car like this, but I'm going to talk a little bit today about why I actually believe that, and we're just going to go over some of the cool things about the Lotus Elise and just kind of talk about what makes it so special and what makes it like the poor man's McLaren F1. Just a quick backstory on the Elise in general. So the Elise has been out for 3 generations. This is considered an S2, which is the middle generation. The S1 and the S3 were never sold in the United States. This model here is a 2005. It's actually my 2005. If you guys have followed the channel, I bought this car in January 2023. Proceeded to drive it back in a snowstorm. We've done some cool things with it on the channel. We had a video where I taught my 16-year-old cousin how to drive manual in it, and we've just tried to get it in some content overall. But with the 2005 Elise, it was the first year, as I said, that this came to the United States. And in this car in particular, it is pretty much all stock with one exception. There is an aftermarket Kenwood radio installed, the OEM Lotus one. I do have it, but it's missing the volume knob, so it looks kind of stupid. I'm really not a fan of aftermarket radios, but you got to do what you got to do, and I can Bluetooth to that one, which unfortunately, I hate to admit this, is nicer than the stock radio. So let's get right into it. So to start out with the Elise, I want to go over something that's a little bit misunderstood. So we're going to put the key here and pop the, I believe they would call this the bonnet over in England where this car is made. And this is actually a Toyota 2ZZ engine. So it's a 1.8 liter inline 4. But there's a couple differences with it. So for one, Lotus actually tuned this engine. So it's got a special Lotus tune on it. It's not just like some basic Corolla or Camry, whatever they use this in tune. And then the other thing, it has this very fancy VVTLI technology, which stands for Variable Valve Timing and Lift Intelligence. If you want that in English, that essentially just means that the engine makes some internal adjustments and it gives you a little bit more horsepower at higher RPMs. But this is where the car, people don't quite understand it because one, it's a 4-cylinder, but it's not turbocharged, it's not supercharged, and only makes 190 horsepower and 133 foot-pounds of torque. So you think 190 horsepower, that's not a lot. And it really isn't. I mean, my first car was a 2003 Chrysler Sebring, and that had 200 horsepower. So it's kind of funny. I think this is one of the lowest horsepower cars I've had, but it's awesome. And if you're going to look at numbers like horsepower and torque and all that sort of stuff, you got to look at every number because this car weighs less than 2,000 pounds. That's crazy. I mean, they don't even make a new car today that you can buy that's under 2,000 pounds. And the lightest sports car in the market is the Miata, which I believe is right around 2,300 pounds. That's 180 horsepower. So this has 10 more horsepower and it's 300 pounds lighter. So it's not just about the horsepower, it's about the weight. And because it's so light, it actually is pretty quick. And we'll talk about that a little more when we're driving. But I actually wanted to go over some of the things on this car. I mean, they were really dedicated to making this car light. I want to show you guys some of the crazy things that they did to it. Probably the biggest thing that Lotus did to save weight on this car is it is an aluminum tub. So most cars traditionally have a steel frame. This car is a tub design, which is supposed to be more rigid for, you know, if you're going to use it on the track and stuff. But the whole thing's aluminum. It's aluminum here, under the floorboards. It's aluminum. The whole thing is aluminum. And we'll talk about the logistics and like the ergonomics of this tub in a little bit because it is very deep, as you can see. But this is just something that's kind of weird. You just don't see it a lot in most cars. So another thing that they did, and it's kind of crazy when you start looking around in this, is they just cut holes in everything. So for example, the passenger footrest here has holes cut in it. The divider between the driver and passenger footwell has holes in it. The glove box is just a hole. There's not even a door on it. And one of the coolest things about this car, and actually one of the reasons why I was particularly drawn to this exact one, Lotus offered a power window package in these cars. You got a couple other things, added like 20-something pounds. But I think that's stupid because one, they use plastic like window switches, which doesn't look good. But if you get the crank windows, which is saves weight, they actually cut a hole out of the window crank just to save some minuscule amount of weight. And it's aluminum to match pretty much all the trim and the tub on the car. And I just think that's so cool. I mean, what do you need power windows for in this car that's like you can touch both sides of the doors as a short person like me? All right, another cool thing they did to save weight was the steering. So before I talk about the steering itself, I do want to just say this is one of the coolest steering wheels. It's incredibly tiny. I'm sure that saves a little bit of weight too. And it's actually from Momo, which they make a ton of aftermarket racing wheels. And this is the factory Lotus steering wheel. But the thing that's weird about it is there's no power steering on this car. They didn't even offer it actually on the Elise. And there's 2 reasons for that. 1, the car's already so light that you really don't need it. 2, I mean, it adds weight. You don't need it already, and it would add a couple more pounds if you put it in. And honestly, we'll talk about it when we drive it. I do think that that's actually one of the best parts about this car is that they did not choose to put power steering in it. Another thing that's unique about the Elise, and they really save lightweight, this full body is fiberglass. And it's so extreme. If you actually take a look in the trunk here, first of all, the whole thing's not carpeted, but you can see it's not finished in here. And I was actually told by the guy I bought the car from, if you put something sharp in the trunk and it's not in a box, whip a corner too fast, you can actually puncture through the side of your trunk with whatever object you put in there. You're probably not going to have that problem in like any other car ever. Another thing, and this is such a stupid one, but I for some reason I think it's really cool. They used Lotus lettering instead of kind of slapping a badge on the back here. I think it looks a little more high-end, but the funniest part about this is that this isn't a badge. This is just a sticker, and same with the Elise lettering here. It's all just vinyl lettering. Probably saves the most minuscule, unnoticeable amount of weight, but that's just how Lotus is, and I love the attention to detail for things like that. Now, the last thing that really saves weight about this car is the size. This thing is ridiculously tiny, every dimension. It's narrow, it's short, and it's low. I actually did a little comparison here. The length of this car is 149 inches, and just to give you a reference on what that looks like to any other modern car, like a 2020 Ram 1500 crew cab 5.7 bed, I actually used to have one of those, was 144.5 inches wheelbase. So that means this car is just a few inches too long for me able to fit between both wheels of a regular 1500 truck. If you took a heavy duty, 2500 Ram, F-Series, Silverado, whatever, this car could probably fit between the wheelbase, which is just ridiculous. They don't make anything the size of this anymore. And people, I mean, it's crazy. When you park this next to a Viper and it looks small. I mean, it's crazy how tiny this thing is. So now that we kind of covered all of the lightweight things, there's just two things that I really like personally about this car that I want to talk about. And the first being the styling. So, I mean, let's just start off with the fact that it looks like a supercar. I mean, undoubtedly, so many people don't even know what this is either. I mean, it just looks like some crazy car. I do think the front end, it looks a little bit like a spider, like with these eyes. And it also looks like it's kind of smiling, which is a little goofy, but I think it looks exotic. But if you come over to the side, I mean, I think the side vent is so cool. I think this Lotus branded fuel cap is cool. And I think the back end is just absolutely gorgeous. I mean, I say it looks Ferrari-esque. I think it's more European styling. I mean, obviously it's a European car, but I just think the mesh on the rear grille here, the diffuser, the tail lights, the little vent. I mean, I absolutely like the way this looks. And it's got the little, very subtle lip spoiler. Probably my favorite angle on the car. I just think it's absolutely gorgeous. My second favorite thing about this car is the gauge cluster, and specifically the tachometer. Now, it looks a little bland, and I've heard people say that. I think it's, not to sound like a tool here, but I think it's a little more race focused. But there's one thing I like particularly about the tachometer, and that's the fact that the numbers are squished from 1 to 3,000 to try to fit in the lower RPMs. I mean, they know you're going to be revving it so high anyways that they just squeeze those into basically 1,000 worth of RPMs on any other number, and they're just compressed down to that. I think that's so cool. The second thing I think is really cool, besides the fact that it goes up to 10,000 RPM, is that there's a little light on the top there, and it flashes when the immobilizer's on, but when you're driving it, that acts as your red line. Now, the reason they didn't just paint the red line on this car was there's actually 3 different red lines. When the engine is cold, it only lets you go to about 6,000 RPM, and it won't let you go any further. However, once it's fully warmed up, it'll let you go all the way up to 8,000, and that's also when, after 6,000 or so, is when that variable valve timing and lift integration technology that I was talking about earlier kicks in. But the other thing, too, is when you're doing a full, flat-out, like, acceleration from 0 to as fast as you want to go, it'll actually let you go all the way up to 8,500 RPM. And it indicates when you're supposed to shift by just lighting up a little red light. I think that is so cool. You can keep your eyes on the road, you see the light, and you just know to shift. Such a cool piece of technology, and they did it very simply, and I think that's absolutely awesome. So now we're going to talk about some of the more unique and not as enjoyable quirks and just weird things about the Elise. The first thing is the top. Now, to the top's credit, very easy to take on and off, and it actually doesn't look terrible. They also did offer a hard top for these, which I think is cool. This car does not have that. But there's 2 problems with the top. One, they actually weren't even designed to be watertight. I was actually looking through the Elise owner's manual, and there's a line here about how not only do they consider water leaks normal, but if you run the car through an automatic car wash, it would void your new car warranty, which I think is kind of insane. But the other problem, and this is also comes in conjunction with this aluminum tub, is it is so tough to get in and out of here. Now, I've put about 2,500 miles on this car. I've had it for about 9 months now, and I still even struggle with the top on. I mean, you look like an absolute idiot falling in and out of this thing. And it's like, okay, I kind of made it look smooth getting in, but then you get out, and it just, there's no way to look good doing it. I mean, you look like a clown, and it's definitely one of those things when I show people this car, that's usually the first thing that they go, what the hell is this? Another odd thing about the Elise is the toolkit. So, for one, it's small, it's not that huge, whatever. They just throw a piece of Velcro on it so you can slap it wherever you feel like it fits on the trunk. But you take a look at it, and I'm sorry, but does this look like it could pull a Barbie Jeep, yet alone a whole car to you? I mean, the threads are like so tiny on it. This scares me. I hope I never have to use this. Kind of weird that they would even give you one that small. So the next thing I want to talk about is the clamshell. So the clamshell is basically this whole front piece is one body panel, and it is incredibly labor intensive to remove. I know that because it's been removed 3 times since I owned it. So when I bought the car, there was a blow-on motor concern, and the dealership that I bought it from took care of it for me completely. They paid for it. It needed a blower motor resistor, which apparently was a design flaw from the factory from these. They would pool up water, it would fry the resistor, the blower motor would stop working. So we got that all repaired, everything was working, and then like a month later, the actual blower motor died on me. I never hit the other dealer back up. I felt like they made good on their part, and obviously I should have probably just told the shop to correct it at the time. But I had to pay again for the first time to get the clamshell all the way off, and that sucked. I mean, it was between what I paid and that dealer paid to get this blower motor fixed, we were looking at over $4,000, and $3,000 of that about was labor. So it's absolutely ridiculous trying to get this clamshell on and off. And then the second portion to that too is that it's just fragile. It's fiberglass, it's kind of sensitive. Oh yeah, and the other time it came off was when they did a recall on it. One of the things was seized in the oil cooler and they had to take it. I mean, it's a lot of work and it takes a lot of time. And it just kind of sucks. I mean, it's a Toyota engine, it's a Toyota transmission. Everything is, you would think is reliable, but when you have to start working under the clamshell here, it's just not fun. Now, another thing with the Elise, you can look at this as a positive or a negative, is these seats. So what I really like about them is that they're very deep bucket seats. I mean, you really stick in them, and it's great for when you're flying around corners. But there's 2 weird things with them. One is that they're pretty much mounted to the floor. I mean, there is not a lot of adjustment. This seat doesn't actually slide. This one slides a little bit. This one's fixed in place. And you almost sit in it more like a beach lounger where your legs are really far out versus like a normal car, you're sitting in it like a normal chair. So that's a little weird. But the part that can kind of suck is how stiff these seats are. I don't know about you guys. I have never heard a seat that sounds like that. I mean, I don't know if they were trying to like save weight by not putting cushion on here. But let me tell you something. You drive this car for 8 hours home like I did the one time, and you can't feel your ass. I mean, everything's numb. It is just so uncomfortable after like an hour or two. It's great for like I said, if you're just taking a fun little drive, but I mean, these seats become old real quick when you sit in this car for more than an hour. So the last painful thing before we take off to talk about how it drives is starting this thing. So you're going to notice, first of all, this is the key. You just get a bunch of unlabeled buttons, and you don't know what any of them really mean. So you take the key, you stick it in the ignition, doesn't do anything, doesn't start. And then you realize there's a start button over here, and that doesn't do it either. So what you have to do to start this car is you take the key, you hit the button with the dot on it. Why? I don't really know. It makes a beep at you. Then you take the key, you put it in, you'll hear the fuel pump engage, and you can start the car up. Another thing that's really weird, I don't know if you could see, I didn't push the clutch in. I had somebody tell me that you don't need to do that. They actually worked on this car for me, and they said they learned that the hard way a long time ago when they accidentally pretty much started the car in gear without putting the clutch in, and it went flying on them. So, good thing to know if you're going to buy one of these. Alright, so driving impressions on the Elise. The first thing you'll probably notice is that the suspension is just awfully stiff. I mean, you feel every single bump. Now, on the flip side, that makes the car like so agile, and that's fantastic. But you really do feel everything with it. That's probably like the first thing I noticed when I drove it. The most surprising thing, though, is the sound. It actually sounds phenomenal for a 4-cylinder. I mean, I did not expect that at all when I first bought it. I was actually very surprised by it, and we'll actually do a little pull for you guys here in a second. and you can see what I'm talking about. The other thing, the shifter. I really like the shifting feel on this car. It's notchy, it kind of clicks into place, and I feel like that's just a lot nicer because you feel it click into gear a little more. I know people like the really buttery gearboxes because they say, oh, it's just so smooth, but to me, you lose a little bit of feeling for that, and I don't know, I really just don't like that, but it does sound pretty incredible. Now, you will notice, once I get up there in RPM, you'll hear that variable valve timing and lift integration kick in. Here we go. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? But then you get to the part of the car that's really something, and that is the handling. I mean, it is just absolutely incredible how well this thing can take a corner. And you know, the thing is, not having power steering just gives you such a different connection to the road. I mean, it really is something. And I mean, you can just move the wheel a little bit, and I mean, it just darts to where you want to go. I think this has got to be the best handling car I've ever driven. Now, I do think most Porsches, I mean, they are known for handling phenomenally well too. But there is just, you get the edge on this car with the lack of power steering. I mean, it's just a different feel. And you can definitely like feel it when you're going over bumps a little bit more too. But I mean, the thing is just fantastic around corners. They're coming up a pretty sharp turn here. I mean, it just hugs. You get a little tire squeal there. I mean, it's crazy. I do think this car would benefit from a set of like real nice tires. But you know, it's a fantastic car. And I also want to say too, like clutch, brake, and everything, very standard for what you'd expect on this. The clutch, you have to let up pretty far for it to engage. But the brakes, they're normal. They're not like insane Brembos or anything, but the car is light. You don't need much to stop it. I believe they're multi-piston calipers. I mean, it stops pretty nice. And you know, the car is just, it's so much fun to drive. I mean, it really does feel like a supercar. Just, you know, a little less power. And like I said, the power, it doesn't feel like 190 horsepower. It feels like it's got more than that because of the weight. Now, I'm not saying this thing, especially, you know, in today's standard, I mean, there's so many cars that are so fast, it's not going to necessarily blow the doors off anything. But the experience that you get driving it, going through the corners, I mean, it is second to none. I mean, I have not driven another car that's given me that, and I especially think for the price point. I mean, sure, I'm sure if we start looking at cars that are hundreds of thousands of dollars, yeah, they might drive a little better than this, but you know, realistically, this car is worth, you know, if you get a real rough one, you're probably in the high 30s. If you get a real nice one, you're probably at like 60. So, I mean, it's really dependent on what you do there. But I just think it's a fantastic car, and you know, just the driving experience is what makes up for any of the other stuff that you have to deal with this car. So that has been my 2005 Lotus Elise. Now, at the beginning of the video, I said this car is like the poor man's McLaren F1. And I do truly mean that. And this is what I mean by that. I'm not calling this car cheap by a normal car standard, but it is considerably cheap when you compare it to other supercars and high-end exotics. But you know, the McLaren F1 is considered to be like the best driving car ever made. Obviously, it's a V12. They made 106 cars total, only 64 road cars. And you know, that car trades probably $15, $20, $25 million for a regular road car, which is absolutely insane. Now, you look at another car that's regarded to be one of the best driving cars ever, Porsche Carrera GT. They made like 1,400 of those. You know, that's a V10. Once again, focused on lightweight, and those go for like $1 million. So this car, in my eyes, is like the 4-cylinder version of that. Sure, it doesn't have all the horsepower of those cars, but it's exotic looking, it's very lightweight, and it's meant to just be an absolute joy to drive. And I've really enjoyed owning this car. You know, I've had some hiccups with some of the servicing, but every time I get frustrated with it, I go take it out on a drive, and it is just absolutely incredible. So this is a fantastic car. I really think if you are looking for a car that you're not going to drive necessarily a lot to use it, and you're okay with having something that's uncomfortable, but just an absolute blast on the weekends, you should definitely consider one of these. Definitely drive one before if you're tall. Good luck. But I'm very happy with this car. I hope you guys enjoyed watching it. If you have any comments, thoughts, if you want to buy my Elise or something, I don't know, just leave it in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.